Yeah, my name is Leon Hills, and I've got a YouTube channel called Leon Creator. Fairly recently, since lockdown, I started making movie creatures. This is one of my best, it's probably my favorite one. And my channel, my YouTube channel, is not just about making movie creatures. There's other things as well, but I'll talk to you about that later. So when I sculpt my movie creatures, I use different techniques. So I thought I'd talk you through some of them and see what you think. So the first thing to show you is heads. Okay? Quite often I will make a bust of a character, normally from Star Wars or something like that. And if I ever go to a car boot sale, I'll just buy heads like this, and I normally pick them up for like a couple of pounds. So that's a polystyrene head. I also buy these sorts of heads, okay? So I probably look a little bit strange walking around because I try and buy as many as possible. So, you know, when you've got a few and they're all sort of dangling from your hand like that and you're just carrying lots of heads, it looks a bit strange. But like I say, normally I pick them up for about £2 or £3. And then all I do is cut the hair off, and then I just work on them. So I can build up the shapes of the other characters just with aluminium foil kind of squashed on the top of the head, build up the main shape, and then I can use things like kitchen paper and PVA glue just to build up more of a shape. And then I use this product called Milliput, which is like a 2-part putty. I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. If I'm making a figure, what I tend to do is this. Yeah, this is called a wire armature. So what you do is you just take some aluminium wire, and aluminium wire is really soft, and you just twist it. So on something like this, I just take a simple wooden base, drill a hole, drill another hole, put in the aluminium wire, stick it in with super glue, twist the wire, and you can just make a real simple shape like this really quickly. This has got one of these inside it, yeah, but obviously a lot bigger, and not just a couple of wires wrapped around each other, but lots of wires over and over again to make it really strong. Okay, then the second stage of my figures usually is this. So aluminium foil squashed on. This is just a very basic one I made for this talk just to show you. But you can see, just squash it on to get the main shape, and then I can build on top of this, again with like PVA glue. It has to be really strong PVA glue, okay? You can't just use kids' PVA glue because it's not strong enough. You have to use, you know, the stuff they use for flooring, like wood flooring PVA glue. It's really, really tough. And yeah, you build up layers like paper mache. So that's that one. I was going to show you this as well, look. Yeah, she looks prettier now, don't you think? So that's one where I just cut the face off, put a skull in there, and a nice brain. But yeah. So if you my stand, if you haven't seen it already, is full of like movie creatures, all kinds of movie creatures, and yeah, the weirder the better. You know, like in Star Wars, you have all the human people figures. I'm not interested in those. I like the weird creatures. Like the weirder the better. So that's that side of my channel. By the way, I was going to show you this as well. The Milliput that I used, I was going to talk to you about. I've got some here. This is what it looks like. Okay, so you buy it like this, and it comes as 2 sticks. Can you see? So you break off a bit of each one, as long as it's the same size, and then you mix it together, squash it together until it's streak-free, and then it sets like rock hard at room temperature in about 4 hours. So it means like you could work on a bit of your model, add the textures and things, and then when it's dried, you just work on another bit and just carry on doing it. So this gremlin, for example, I did this one, and this one probably took me about 3 or 4 weeks to make this. Okay, and at the time, I was determined to use a lot of milliput on it. I knew it was going to be a really detailed one that I wanted to put a lot of effort into. So it's got the wire armature, and the rest is all milliput. So it's pretty solid milliput. So this one, it probably at the time cost me about £200 in milliput. But somebody saw this on YouTube, and they contacted the guy from Milliput, who is in the audience. He's here today. And he now sponsors my YouTube channel, which is cool. So even if he didn't, I did this talk yesterday, and I said, don't tell him this. But, I mean, he's in the audience now, so he's going to hear it. But I would still use Milliput, even if he wasn't sponsoring my channel, because I think it is the best product for what I do. But look, if I've ever got bits of milliput left over, if I'm making a model, I don't want them to go to waste. I don't want them to just dry into a lump. So I just turn them into things like this. Can you see? Like a little, if I've got a little flat section of milliput, I just put a texture into it. Or look, here's another one. Or I'll do like kind of skin textures and things like that. And you can use these then if you're doing another model. Say you've got a bit of arm or something and it's all like soft milliput, you can use the one that's hardened to kind of press into it to make all textures and give it more kind of skin texture. So that's that. And yeah, that is that side of my channel, the sculpting side. There is another way that you can work. I'll show you this. In this box, these little creatures here, show you this one on here. Okay. What I've done with these ones is something called kit bashing. Has anybody heard of kit bashing? Yeah? So what you do with kit bashing is you go to a car boot sale or a charity shop or something and you buy loads of little cheap plastic animals, little plastic figures, that kind of thing. And then what you do is you just use a pair of wire cutters like this, little pair of wire cutters, and you just cut off like all the legs of the animals and all the arms or whatever, and then you just stick them all together in different orders, and you end up with a new creature, which is pretty cool. And then I just use milliput to go in and just like do a bit of sculpting into it as well to join the legs on, and then I paint them all. My painting process with these is I use acrylic paints, and I have a few techniques that I like to use. So on most of my creatures, I tend to paint them a very dark colour first, like the whole thing, just one really dark colour. And then I use this technique called dry brushing. Has anybody heard of dry brushing? Yeah? What you do is you take your acrylic paint on your paintbrush. I usually use a really old rubbish paintbrush that's all frayed, you know? And I put some acrylic on it, and I rub it on a bit of kitchen paper, and it's almost dry then. There's hardly any paint left on it. And what you're doing is you're going over your model, and you're kind of dusting it over the top surface. So all of the lighter coloured paint goes on all of the higher up places, like all the bumps and things, and it gives you this really cool effect. So I use that a lot. You can also do what's called a wash, where you take some of your acrylic paint and you really water it down, and then you just kind of flow it onto your creature, and it, because it's wet, it goes into all of the little cracks and things, and again that helps all of your details to show up, because it's no good putting in all of this effort to make all this detail and then painting quite a flat colour so you can't see any of the details anymore. That wouldn't be as good. So that's that side of my YouTube channel. I made Audrey 2. Anybody that's been to my stand, you will have seen Audrey 2, which is the plant from Little Shop of Horrors. I made that for my wife for her 40th birthday, because she's a big fan of that. And that's kind of where all this started. I did that one first, and then lockdown came along, Okay, so I'm an adult education teacher, so I teach classes in like drawing and painting. And when lockdown came, I had to start doing that online. And so can you imagine trying to teach somebody drawing and painting with like a little camera about here, like getting in the way, and you're trying to show. It wasn't ideal. So I got into the sculpting side then at lockdown, and all of my creatures that you see on my stand, they've all been done, pretty much all of them, since lockdown. So I've been quite busy. When I was a kid, I used to use a product called Fimo. Has anybody heard of that? It's like a bit like kind of plasticine or something like that, but you make something with it and then you put it in the oven. You have to cook it to bake it. And it was okay, but if you ever open the packet a little bit, it dries up, and then you've got to really, to get it to work. So, yeah, as an adult, I got more into obviously the milliput. Okay, so that's that side, like I say. Oh, I was going to mention as well, I don't sell any of my creatures I don't sell them, I just don't. It's because when I make these, they're for me. And if I were to sell one of these, I would probably then use the money to buy something like this. So I might as well just make them and keep them for myself. I think you'll agree, like, it would be sad as well to hand them over. I couldn't do it. Somebody said to me, well, why don't you just make one and sell it and then make another one and keep that one? But what would happen is I would make the second one and it would not be quite as good as the first one that I'd just given away. And I'd be like, what have I done that for? I should have kept the first one. So, yeah, so I don't do that. But I do commissions, And I tend to prefer to do commissions of things that I've never heard of before in my life. So the guy from Milliput commissioned me to make, have you heard of Five Nights at Freddy's? Some of you? Okay, the rabbit, Bonnie? I made that. And I made him quite big. And he's a big purple rabbit, for those of you who don't know him. And he's got a guitar. He's playing a guitar. So I made that. And the reason that I didn't mind is because at the time, I'd never heard of Five Nights at Freddy's. So I made it, and I was fine handing it over. But like at the moment, as an example, I quite want to make, say, Jabba the Hutt from Star Wars, because I haven't made him yet. And if one of you guys came up to me and said, hey, I want to pay you to make me Jabba the Hutt, I'd be like, no. No, I don't want to. But if you came up and said some random figure that I'd never heard of, I'd be fine with that, and I'd do that, that's fine. Okay, so I definitely prefer unknown characters. My mum and my wife, they quite want me to sell my characters because they take up a lot of space. As an example, I made the egg from the movie Alien. I made that, and then I made the face hugger, and then I made the chest burster. But you know what I haven't made yet? The full-size alien. And I was at a car boot sale, and I bought a big mannequin, and it's like the perfect starting point for making Alien. And now I've just got to try and persuade my wife to let me make it. I'm working on it, But she keeps saying, could you make something a bit smaller? She wants me to make little things. But as you can see, life size is it's more effective, isn't it? By the way, Gremlins as well. If you've ever watched the movie Gremlins, I don't think you really think about it too much. But when you make one life size, you look at it, and I've kept a lot of reptiles in my time. Okay, lizards and things, and their legs are really strong, like really muscly. And when you see one of these at this size, you think, yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with that, with the claws and the teeth. That could do some serious damage. So it's nice seeing them at that sort of size. And I think my wife and my mum would prefer, instead of all my creatures, what's called empty space, yeah? And I just find empty space quite boring. I'd much rather have loads of creatures. So in my conservatory, imagine going into a room and it's just like floor to ceiling, loads of different movie creatures all looking at you. I mean, I love that. That's my idea of heaven. Some people might be a bit creeped out by it, but I like it. Okay, then the next section of my my YouTube channel, if you ever visit my YouTube channel, I do a lot of drawing and painting. So I've done some where I've set up my camera and I've done, you know, watercolor paintings or drawings, that kind of thing. And then they're all done as time lapses, so you can watch them. And it might be a painting that has taken me hours to do, but you're just seeing my hand going like this, really fast, and this painting just miraculously appears in a few minutes. But you can see it, and if it's a watercolor painting, you can even see the paint kind of drying on the paper. It's really satisfying to watch, and I just set it to music as well, so it's quite relaxing and calming to watch it. My dad, when I was a kid, he used to do lettering, you know, like with technical pens, rotring pens. And so when all the other kids in my class were using like wax crayons and stuff like that, my dad gave me rotring pens that are about like 20 or 30 quid each. So I was using those when I was really young. And I think that really helped me, you know, get into the art type stuff. I did, as my A-levels, I did A-level art, I did graphical communication, and I did biology, okay? When I did my GCSEs, my biology teacher was a guy called John Buckley, and he also taught Chris Packham. You know Chris Packham on the telly? Okay. When I went to do my A-levels, I was taught by another teacher, biology, a guy called Alex Faulkner, and he also taught Chris Packham. So I had a good set of teachers there. Then I did what's called a higher national diploma in natural history illustration. So I basically spent 2 years of my life drawing and painting animals. That was like the perfect thing for me at the time. But because I got really into it, I started doing paintings of animals that are quite photographic. They look like photographs. But if I were to paint an animal, like a photograph, a painting about this sort of size, I could be working on it for like 2 or 3 months trying to get it spot on. So when I started doing these, they're much quicker. I know, like this one took me 3 or 4 weeks. That's fine. This is a one-off. A lot of like my smaller ones, they might take me 2 or 3 days. You know, they're really quite quick. So it's almost like I think about doing a sculpt, and then 2 or 3 days later it's done, and I'm like, hey, I've done it. Add it to the collection. So that's why I'm now doing that in my spare time, rather than just doing these paintings that take months all the time. By the way, when I was at Bournemouth doing my higher national diploma, because it was Bournemouth, it was near the beach, I know I said I spent 2 years drawing and painting animals, but probably the first year I spent a lot of time skateboarding and BMXing to the beach. It was mainly the second year that I got my arse into gear and did all of the painting. Okay, then I topped that up to a degree, just in general illustration. That was at Middlesex Uni. And then I did a PGCE to do teacher training, just GCSE and A-level. But what I found is when you've got a class of kids, okay, most of them want to be there, they want to be learning, but you might get the odd one or two that are cheeky monkeys, shall we say, and you spend a lot of the lesson just trying to deal with the cheeky monkeys, and it sort of ruins it for the rest of the class. And you might have heard this as well. There's quite a lot of paperwork involved with teaching. So in the end, I decided to teach adult education classes instead, because the adults, they tend not to throw paper at you, paper aeroplanes or anything like that. They're quite well behaved. And because I'm doing that, I'm teaching about 7 or 8 classes a week. So I end up doing the same picture with all of them. So I start the week, and then by the end of the week, I've got really quite good at the same picture. And I end up with loads of paintings. So I've got like thousands of drawings and paintings, all like in boxes, you know. And I tend to keep the best one for my portfolio and just sell off the rest. I've done a children's book as well. This is, can you see that? That's my children's book. I did 2 actually. The first one that I did was a lot smaller than this, and it took me about 6 weeks to do all of the paintings for it. And I sent it off to some publishers, and when you do that, it's quite disheartening. You get a lot of no's coming back. But I had a letter from Scholastic. Have you heard of Scholastic? It's quite a big publisher. And they said, we're going to send it for a second reading. And you're like, a second reading? Yeah! You get all excited. And months went past, and then it went for a third reading. And when you hear it's going for a third reading, you're like, yeah, they're definitely going to but they still didn't publish it. But then there was another publisher called Ragged Bears. They did a famous book called Dinosaur Roar, kids book, and they saw it, and they wanted to buy my text, and then they wanted to get one of their illustrators to actually do the illustrations for it. And I was like, no, that's my baby, that's my book, you know. So I decided to redo it. So I did this one instead. The first one took me 6 weeks. This one took me 10 months to do, because if you look at any of the illustrations in this, yeah, they're all quite full on. And the actual original artwork for this was 40 centimeters by 40. So quite a lot bigger than this book. So I did that, and my publisher saw it, and he liked it so much that he published this one, and he published the first one that I'd done, even though it's exactly the same story. And he just said, because it's smaller, we'll aim that one at younger kids and this one at older kids. Unfortunately, my publisher has died. He had a heart attack. But in the meantime, somebody at the Natural History Museum, I don't know how, but they came across my books, and they're using it now at the Natural History Museum in their educational department, because it's a very educational book. Like, on each page, a frog meets like a couple of insects that are similar to each other, and it shows kids the differences between different insects and things like that. So that's that. Another part of my YouTube channel, this is probably the problem with my YouTube channel, if I'm honest. I think with a YouTube channel, you're supposed to specialize in one thing, and then you get millions of subscribers, right? My YouTube channel has remained quite tiny. I think I have less than 2,000 subscribers, and I think it's because I've got a lot of interests. But I couldn't just specialize in one thing, because I love too many things. So yeah, the next part is keeping unusual animals, okay? When I was a kid, I used to walk around, this is when I'm a really small kid, with a matchbox in my pocket, and I used to catch caterpillars and things and keep them in a little matchbox. As I got a bit older, my dad bought me a lizard, pet lizard, and I got really into that. And then I kept tree frogs, and I just ended up keeping more and more animals as I got older. And then I started breeding them. So I've kept and bred like chameleons and lizards and all kinds of things. But then, about 2 years ago, I started getting this like fluttering sensation, and I've got this thing, or I'd have this thing called atrial fibrillation, which is where your heart kind of flutters, and it just seemed a little bit worse than normal, a bit stronger, and I thought, I'm just going to go get it checked out with the doctors. And he sent me to a hospital to have it checked out more, and they said, will you just go and take a seat in the waiting room? Somebody will come and talk to you, because you're not going home today. And I was like, okay, what's this all about, you know? And it turned out that my aorta, you know your aorta, that's the important one, the big one, okay? It's supposed to be about 2 centimeters across. And mine was about 8 centimeters across, right? And they showed me this graph, and they said, at some point, when your aorta is growing like this, it just bursts in your chest. And they said, this is a graph, and it's quite a steady line. And look, when you get to about 8 centimeters, it goes like that. Your chances of it bursting are about 8 centimeters. So they said, look, you're going to be having open heart surgery in about 2 weeks' time. And they sent me home. So then you're at home and you're going, stay calm, don't do anything, just keep calm. And anyway, that 2 weeks turned into, I think, about 2 or 3 months. So it was quite a scary 2 or 3 months. And then they got me in to St Bart's Hospital in London, and they gave me the old open heart surgery. So I've got like a cool scar, a manly scar that's about, a foot long. And I've also got, and this is the cool thing, I've got a mechanical heart valve in here, right? I could have had an animal valve, apparently, but I've got a mechanical one. So if it's really quiet, listen, that's not today, is it? It's really loud here. But if it was really dead quiet now, you'd be able to hear me ticking. I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, I did that, and when that happened, because I had this, if you've been in those pet shops, yeah, they're like, they keep all reptiles in the pet shop, and you know how it's like floor to ceiling, like vivariums and things with all the animals in. That was several rooms in my house were like that. So when I had this, I had to kind of prepare for that, and I got rid of, like, when I say got rid of, I rehomed a lot of my animals, and then I ended up, after I'd sold them all, and then I recovered, and I got better, and I thought, oh, it's a shame I sold those all off. And I've got a pet armadillo, okay? It's quite an unusual pet. Actually, I can show you this, look. This is not my pet armadillo. This is one I made out of milliput. I'll show you this one, okay? What do you think? It's pretty cute, huh? So he's called Herbie, and he's a 3-banded armadillo, and I've had him for quite a few years, and obviously I wasn't going to sell him because he's like my baby, and he was really hard to kind of come by in the first place. I'll tell you about that in a second. But when I sold all my animals off, and I had a bit of money from selling them off, I was selling the last of my snakes, and this guy said, oh, I've got a friend who's selling some armadillos, some 9-banded armadillos, which look like this one. This is like your typical armadillo, And so I've got several of these, and I'm going to hopefully breed them. That's the idea. Fingers crossed. Right. I was going to tell you about Herbie when I bought him. So imagine this. I've kept all kinds of exotic pets. Yeah. Frogs, toads, newts, salamanders, geckos, chameleons, lizards, snakes, weird exotic mammals. But what I always wanted my whole life was a 3-banded armadillo, because they're the ones that are about that size, they're quite small, and they curl into a ball. So I kept typing in, armadillo into various kind of websites, trying to find one for sale. And for years I did that without any luck. And then typically, one came up. I typed in armadillo, and it was like, yeah, armadillo for sale. And I was like, I haven't got any money. It's always the way, isn't it? When something comes up, you're completely skinned to the time. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I took loads of stuff and I put it on eBay straight away. I said, can you keep him for me? And they said, we'll keep him for you for like a week. We'll keep him until Friday. So I put all this stuff on eBay, and I sold quite a lot of the stuff. And I think I needed about £100 more to be able to buy my armadillo. And this last thing sold. And you know how on eBay, if something sells, people quite often just buy it straight away. They pay for it instantly. On this occasion, the guy didn't pay for it instantly, so I had to email him, and I said, "Is there any chance you could, pay for it tonight? Because I'm buying an armadillo." It probably sounded really dodgy. I'm buying an armadillo tomorrow. Anyway, he did, so I was able to get him. So that was great. Yeah, I've got quite a lot of weird stories about animals growing up. I used to have a rescue iguana. Somebody phoned me up and said, I've got an iguana, it needs rehoming, do you want it? And I said, I don't know, I'd have to come and see it. So I went to see it, and this thing was like a fully grown male iguana. So he was as long as this table. He had a long tail, but he was a big, solid, muscly iguana, and he had all the crest and everything, and he was orange as well, which is, a sort of a more rare colour. And I was like, you are coming home with me. And I was thinking, where will I rehouse it, yeah? And my wife was at work, and I had this plan. You can imagine, yeah. My wife was at work, and I thought, I know what I'm going to do. And you know, walk-in wardrobes? We had a walk-in wardrobe. And I went into that wardrobe, and guess what came out? All the clothes. It took all the clothes out, everything. So it was a bare, empty, massive space. And then I put a shelf in it, and I bought all these plastic plants and things, and I made it look like a jungle, and it had all like the thermostat and everything, and it was perfect. And I put the iguana in, and he loved it, and I was feeding him. And then my wife came in from work, and I was like, hey, you got to see this thing in the bedroom. And she came in, and obviously at first, when she saw all the clothes, she wasn't so sure. But then when she saw the iguana, she realised why it had to be done. We also, for a while, we had a Flemish giant rabbit. Has anybody seen one of these things? You know Pets at Home? They're everywhere, aren't they? Pets at Home. I went into a Pets at Home. Normally, they've got like mice and gerbils and, you know, small rabbits. But I looked in this cage, and there was a Flemish giant rabbit. And I'd never seen one before. This thing is honestly about this size. And it's solid. It's a massive rabbit. And I looked at it for probably about 3/4 of an hour, I guess. I was thinking, my mouth was open. I was like, I've never seen anything like it. And it was like £100 or something. But I was like, yep, you're coming home with me. So I bought it home, and it had an indoor enclosure, but we would just leave the door open, and it would just like have free run of the house. The only thing with those is if you've got any cables, you have to coat your cables with something solid, because they like nibbling cables. But every time friends came round, this thing would just be loose in the kitchen. And if friends had never seen it before, it would come lolloping around the corner, and people would be like, what's that? You know, it was like bigger than our cat. It was a huge, great thing. I've kept a lot of like tarantulas and things as well. By the way, when I was a kid, my mum got used to me keeping like lizards and tree frogs and that sort of thing. And she said, yeah, they're fine, but no snakes. So what do you think I did? Yeah, I bought a snake. And then she got used to that. And then she said, okay, yeah, snakes are fine, but no tarantulas. So I bought a tarantula. And then she did the same thing about scorpions. Now she's kind of used to everything, really. So that's that side of things as well. The next side of my channel is called the museum section, because at my house I've got cabinets that are full of all kinds of like curiosities and things. So even when I was a kid, I used to go on beaches and things collecting fossil sharks' teeth, that sort of thing. And now I've got things like seed pods and cones and marine life, fossils, minerals, gemstones, meteorites and tektites, shells, that sort of thing, animal curiosities, animal skulls and animal skeletons, that kind of thing, flint tools and archaeology. And I've got a cow skeleton. Anybody got one of those? I was quite lucky, because the guy that taught me my GCSE biology, okay, he now works as a conservationist on places where they have natterjack toads. You know, they're really rare in this country, and they have to keep the grass really short and the heathland really short, and they use cows. So on a bit of his land, one of these cows had died like ages ago, you know, and it had turned into a skeleton. And he phoned me up one day and he said, would you like a cow skull? It's big and it's got the horns. And I was like, yeah. And he said, okay, but the deal is you've got to go to this site and you've got to collect up all the other bones as well, put them in bags, because we need to take them off the site. So I did that, gave him the rest of the bones in bin bags, kept the skull. And then about 2 or 3 years go by, and I'm having a conversation with him, and I say, it's a real shame that I didn't keep those other bones, because I could have put it all together as a complete skeleton. And he said, well, it's funny you should say that, because I've still got all the bones still in those bin bags under a hedge. So I went and collected them, and I built this cow skeleton, which is a really cool thing to do. It's a bit like doing a jigsaw puzzle, you know, figuring out what slots into what. The only problem is, if you're ever going to build a cow skeleton, which most of you will at some point, you don't use, you know, those hot melt glue guns, okay? And if you do use a hot melt glue gun, then you're looking at your perfectly formed cow skeleton, and don't put it in a conservatory and then go shopping on a really hot day and then come back and realise that all of the glue has melted and you've just got a pile of bones again and you've got to start again. So I built it a second time, but the second time I wired it properly and I used screws, things that will stay together forever. I went on a holiday, like a beach holiday, with a couple of friends, and I was walking around this bit of cliff, and I got this dead animal smell. You know that dead animal? When you smell it, you're like, yes, you know the one. So I was like, I was thinking, that could be like a seal, or it could be a dolphin, you know, and I got a bit excited. But it turned out it was a pony that had fallen off the cliff and died. And again, it had, you know, nature had done its thing, and it was just a skeleton. So I picked up the skull from this pony, and then I was like, how am I going to get this back to the beach house? Because between me and the beach house was a whole beach full of people sunbathing. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I looked around, and there was an oil drum with a slit in it. And I was able to open the slit and put the skull in and carry it back to the beach house. And when I got back to where my friends were, they were like, what have you got in the barrel? And I was like, a horse's head. And they were like, no, what have you really? And I was like, a horse's head. And then I showed them. So for a while, we called it Boney the Pony, okay? But then after a little while longer, we called it Honky the Donkey, because it did smell a little bit at that stage. And I thought to myself that evening, I thought, I've got the skull, and I was like, don't go back and collect the rest of the bones. So the next day, guess what I did? I went back and collected the rest of the bones. So now I've got a pony skeleton to go with my cow skeleton, which is pretty cool. And I've got a lot of other animal skulls. This is going to sound quite morbid, okay? But if you want to collect animal skulls, one of the ways of doing it is if you find a dead animal, you may start thinking, is this guy a weirdo at this stage? You'll have to make your mind up. But you have to sort of cut the head off a dead animal and then boil it in a pan. So we've got a special pan for boiling heads. I don't do it very often anymore, but when I wanted to start my collection, I had a fox head, for example, that I did that to, and a few other things that I've done like that. And yeah, I don't recommend it because it's quite smelly. By the way, that guy who used to be my biology teacher, at one point I said, I haven't got a badger skull yet, thinking that maybe he would either give me a badger skull or give me the head of a badger so I could deal with it. Anyway, he phoned me up and he said, I think I've sorted out your badger skull problem. And I went to see him, and this was about a week after he told me. He presented me with an entire dead male badger, and I had to deal with it. So that's not recommended. Pretty smelly. Anyway, in the year 2000, I spent a year in Australia. We went over, we bought a VW camper van, and we drove across the Nullarbor Plain. And then at the end, after driving across the Nullarbor Plain, our camper van just broke down. And some kind Australian came up, and he tried the key, and nothing happened. And he said, yeah, I think you've seized your engine, mate, like that. And we're like, what do we do about that? Because we were quite young and naive at the time. And he said, there's not a lot you can do about that, mate. And then luckily somebody else towed us to a roadhouse. And this roadhouse was kind of in the middle of nowhere in a little place called Iron Knob. And all there is at Iron Knob, while we were sat there waiting for a new engine for our van, was like an iron mine, an old iron mine. So we were able to go into the iron mine, and you could find really cool minerals and just pick them up. And we had them identified by a mineralogist who lived there. And then every new place we went to in Australia, we went to the local geological survey, and they gave us maps, and we would go looking for things like opals and sapphires and all kinds of different minerals. Yeah, we found some pretty cool stuff over there. There's also, has anybody heard of a tektite? A tektite is like, it's like stuff that falls from space. It comes from space, and as it comes through the atmosphere, it kind of burns up, and you get these little blobs of like molten glass, and they're black. They look black, and it said the good place to find them is on salt lakes, because salt lakes are white. So anything black that's landed on it really shows up. Anyway, typically the first salt lake we came across was covered in black stones. And I didn't have much time, so I just gathered up all these black stones. When I then did have a bit of time, I looked through them all, and it was just like black stone, and then suddenly there was one, and it was a tektite. So I found something that actually has fallen from space, and I had it verified at the Adelaide Museum. They were like, yeah, that's a really good one. So I was like, yeah. So that's one thing. Obviously in Australia, I was doing a lot of like looking for scary creatures, dangerous venomous snakes and spiders. They're everywhere in Australia. When we got into Perth, we went shopping in Perth, and the first animal I saw in Australia was a redback spider just in a shop doorway, and everybody's walking past it in their flip-flops, and I'm like, that's a redback spider. But they're everywhere in Australia, as we found out. There is in Australia a small spider called a white-tailed spider. Has anybody heard of that? It's a tiny little thing that nobody's ever heard of. It's about a centimetre long. And if it bites you, let's say it bites you on the tip of your finger starts to go necrotic where it's been bitten. And they have to chop a bit of your finger off. Okay? And then you think, it heals, and you're like, I'm fine, it's healed. Okay, I'm missing a bit of finger, but it's healed. And then maybe like a year goes by, maybe 2 years go by, and then it starts to come back again, necrotic, and they have to chop another bit of you off, and then and people have lost like whole arms and whole legs because of this little tiny spider. And I saw a lot of those in Australia. So that's that. Have you decided yet, by the way, if I'm a weirdo or not? You probably realised. So the very last, I've got 5 minutes, the last side of my YouTube channel, like I say, it's very varied, is like toy collecting, vintage toys. I'm quite into that, because when I was a kid, my parents bought me all, the old Star Wars figures. And the first Star Wars movie I went to see was Return of the Jedi. It's the first ever movie I saw at the cinema. My mum crept me out of the house while my younger brother was in bed, and we went to see Return of the Jedi, and I really loved Yoda. So I was collecting all these other little figures, and I couldn't get Yoda. And we went on this day trip, and my aunt managed to find me little Yoda. And remember how I said I used to carry around caterpillars in my pocket in a matchbox? It started being Yoda instead in a little matchbox. I used to take him to school, take him everywhere, and I really loved him. So when all of the new Star Wars films came out, the not so good ones, when they all came out, I was talking to my dad, and he said, yeah, we still got all your old figures in the attic. And because I was one of those kids that was really careful with all my toys, they still had all their like capes and all their little weapons and everything. So I spent some of my student loan just buying the last few figures that I needed to make the entire set. So I've got all the original Star Wars figures. And that got me into collecting vintage toys. And then I came across this thing. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's called eBay. It's a very dangerous place. You go there and you go, I remember that toy I used to own as a child. Type it in, and there it is for sale. You could buy it. So I started buying a lot of vintage toys. So yeah, some of my channel is about the vintage toys as well that I've kind of built up. Anyway, I have to say a huge thank you to Stephen Atherton from Milliput. Not only for sponsoring my channel and obviously giving me free Milliput, but he invited me to Makers Central last year, so he introduced me to all of this. Also, thanks to Nick Zametti and the team here for allowing me to display all my creatures. and do these talks as well. Thanks for being such a welcoming audience, and feel free to come and chat to me at my stand afterwards, ask me any questions, or buy one of my books, for example. Yeah, thank you, and please subscribe to my channel because I haven't got many subscribers. Thanks, guys.
Give it up, guys, for Leon, the creator. Thank you, Leon.